Hey everyone, Chanel here from the Shubert organization, and I'm back with another episode of the Shubert Advocacy Series. I'm so pleased that joining me today are Pun Bandhu and Angel Desai from the Asian American Performers Action Coalition, Mandi John and Daphnee McMaster from Black Theater Girl Magic, and Gabrielle Jackson and Julie Ouellette from the Joy Jackson Initiative. Let's welcome them in. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. Let's get right into it. Pun and Angel, if you could please tell me more about AAPAC.
Hi, yes, AAPAC, or the Asian American Performers Action Coalition. Pun and I are two of the original founding members and members of the steering committee. We founded in 2011, and we put out, one of the many things that we do is we put out a yearly statistics report on the racial breakdown, and now we're including gender for directors and writers, and I think artistic directors too, of who is on stage, and now who is writing and directing and producing the theater that we see on Broadway and in the 16 largest nonprofit, or is it 17 now, Pun?
Actually 18. We've
Oh,
expanded
it's
it.
18 now. Okay, 18 now, largest nonprofit or off-Broadway theaters.
Yeah, and we use that report. It's called the Visibility Report to engage with a lot of theater companies, and to help to see help them to hold a mirror to themselves. We know that there's a lot of well-intentioned people in the theater industry who might not be aware of their blind spots. And um, I really think it's important to as we're gearing up to come back from a really traumatic year and a half. I think it's really important that we also have in place sort of a plan. What is the plan moving forward? What is the anti-racist plan? And so that's why we're engaging in discussions like these. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for
Yes,
being
thank you.
here. And Daphnee and Mandi, if you could tell us about Black Theater Girl Magic.
Yes, so thank you so much for having us. We're just truly honored to be here. Black Theater Girl Magic is a nonprofit organization designed to create a more racially just and equitable performing industry for Black and Brown women, and by extension, everyone else. We have been in existence since 2017 as a membership organization with over 2,000 members. And we were originally just kind of focusing on providing networking opportunities, support, community for Black and Brown women in the performing arts, since that's something that we didn't really have at that time. Since the murder of George Floyd, we've also shifted towards advocacy work because, I think that the advocacy work is so desperately needed for the most marginalized of us, and that often tends to be Black and Brown female identifying people. So that's why we've kind of shifted towards more advocacy in the recent years, and that's us in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just quick introduce myself. I'm Daphnee, Public Relations Director for BTGM. Mandi, who's just being our Executive Director. Our organization actually has a lot of members who are volunteering their time tremendously to doing the work that Mandi was talking about. So we do a lot of educational initiatives just to kind of allow Black and Brown women to be exposed to theater in ways that they possibly were left out. So that looks like our musical theater anatomy program, and such as like AMAs, or doing Ask Me Anything series. And it's really just a push for people to feel like they can actually join our organization and be a part of it, as well as boost that advocacy work and legislation that we're actually pushing for.
Great, thanks so much. And Gabby and Julie, please tell us about the Joy Jackson Initiative.
Hi there, my name is Gabrielle Jackson. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and executive director of the Joy Jackson Initiative. And JJI's mission is founded on disrupting old models of work for arts organizations in the US and beyond. We've got a dedicated team of 25 full-time volunteers, and we've developed a robust series of learning tools designed for institutional self-reflection. And these tools help organizations measure their structural integrity to support and celebrate the BIPOC collaborators that enrich their spaces, with an emphasis on examining their relationships with Black and Indigenous people of color. And I'll pass it over to Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm the managing director of Joy Jackson. Really happy to be here.
Thanks so much. So diving right in, I'll ask a question and I'll give you my feelings to start it off. What do you think is one of the biggest obstacles towards making this industry truly equitable, diverse, and inclusive? And I know there are a lot of things that need to be done, but what I think is there's a lot of resistance to being open to learning. And I see a lot of, I'm not racist. I have 5 Black friends. And by putting up these barriers and getting so defensive, they make it so that they can't listen to our voices. And then they're not open to learning about change because they are so convinced that they are not a part of the problem and they don't need to do anything and they don't need to change their behavior. That is what I see as being the obstacle that needs to be jumped over in order to really be able to start doing things. So I wanted to put it to all of you what you think it might be.
I'll take this first and just say that, like, I myself have even encountered, some of that same resistance to learning or growth or change when moving forward. And I think where my stuff comes from, so we talk a lot at JJI about entry points, right? Entry points into the work. Everyone has their own entry point from where they are to start from to where they can grow to, right? And so, like, from my entry points, I think the places where I find myself the most resistant, because I can't judge anybody else's experience, right? So I can't say, people who are not BIPOC or people who are not marginalized are like unwilling to learn. What I can say though is, like, in my moments of unwillingness, where does that come from? And I think in my moments of unwillingness, those moments come from a deep love for the people who are bringing things forward. And inside of me, it has kind of sparked or struck something that's like, wait, but I love you. Wait, but I feel you. Wait, but I understand you. Wait, but I hear you. And that wait, but I think, the place that a lot of these people are coming from, for starters. So within me, where I'm trying to go with this wait, but I, is, oh my goodness, what a beautiful opportunity for learning, right? What a beautiful opportunity for understanding. What a beautiful opportunity to not only donate to the funds, not only call my representatives, but actually put forward that love into action. And I think that's kind of where the rub is here a lot of the time, right? Is that people are like, but I've acted enough, don't you think? I've done the most I can do. I'm done, right? I'm anti-racist, right? I'm fully realized, right? And there's no destination. And I think that's what's missing, is like, there's never a done. It's a consistent, constant need to pull out all of those weeds, even when you find them in yourself, So I'm definitely not above it. And I know that it happens to me. So I think just like pride and recognizing what pride can do is helpful. And also recognizing that those feelings are often rooted in a wait, but I sort of situation. So Mandi Jo, I saw you on mute, I'm sorry.
No, listen, I yes, and because in my experience, I've encountered a lot of people who have a lot of self-identity kind of entrenched in the advocacy work as they saw it, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And like you said, they got to a destination and they thought, listen, this is what I can do. This is what I've got. I'm donating, I'm attending, I'm supporting, I'm doing those things. That's it, right? Like I mean well. I want the best for everyone, even when I'm committing harm or saying a microaggression that I'm not aware of, or. And usually the pushback to, an opportunity for learning is, well, I didn't mean it like that. That's not what we meant. And the idea that people who are not of the global majority, people who are in an unmarginalized position can decide what advocacy looks like is what we are saying is not working anymore. As a person, if you are not a person of color, I don't think that it's effective to have a person who is white to turn around and say, well, this is what the advocacy needs to be in order for the community to move forward. And this is what I've done. Look at all the things that I've done to help your community. It's not, that's kind of how the model as it existed in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, when we were writing the civil rights bill and we were marching. A lot of the advocacy that ended up getting national attention was driven by white politicians, by white advocates, and they set the terms, they set the stage. And I think now we're trying to say we want to be the people who set the terms, and we want to be the people who set the stage. And there's a problem with that. It's kind of, we're coming to terms with what that looks like. Not letting people who aren't us control the narrative. And I think that's been a problem.
I agree with everything that's been said, and will add to that I think, Chanel, to your point that you brought up about that's been echoed, is that the resistance it starts here. You're asking where the starting point is for change, and it starts here. But as people are pointing out, people are defensive because they don't want to feel that they're part of the problem, and I think the fear that it isn't, I think it's bigger than just the fear of, oh, I might be racist, that people are having. I think there's a fear, there's like a cumulative effect of this, where a domino effect, where they realize, if I'm in this position where I have to do something different, that means change. That means my position will change, and I lose my power, and I lose. They see down the road, and maybe even unconsciously sense loss, and like a huge loss, because change is going to result in loss for somebody, but it doesn't mean that loss necessarily is a bad thing. I think this idea that I think what has to happen for people who have power, who are white cisgendered people in power, is that they have to do some hard reckoning and have the humility to just say, whatever I think I've done in the past to help, what else can I do? How else can I, and to just kind of set up the expectation that, yes, some things are going to change, but that it will result in a better world for everybody. And people are going to have to really wrestle with that. I think that's one of the huge obstacles, is letting go.
Loss is a big one. That loss, but maybe we should reevaluate what really are we losing? What really would you be losing to no longer hoard the power at the top of a theater institution? What would you really be losing? Because as the model exists right now, it's dying, it's decaying.
Right.
The theatrical model as it exists, when these subscribers that we have now are gone, there's no one in the model to replace them.
Right.
What are we losing to rebuild the theater structure in our image?
100%, Mandy. There's an economic incentive to wisen up and to change things and to be more diverse. I think the problem becomes when someone says, I don't see myself as a problem, they don't really fully understand that there is a system out there that they are participating in. And it's something, it's, you might encounter white people who are like, I can't, I don't have the power to change things. I'm powerless too, but you're not, it's in the smaller things too. Like I notice when my husband is white, and I notice the respect that he gets more than I do, whether that's from a waiter or someone who's talking, or even if I ask the question, they respond to him. Something as innocuous as that, it really makes an impact, and it's almost unconscious, and so anyone who says that I'm not racist, I think is part of the problem, because they might not be aware of how they are participating in that system.
I also
Yeah.
just want to say that it's so interesting to me, those dynamics when you get into like what Pung was talking about just now, like how people will address your husband as opposed to you. I started taking Julie with me to these larger meetings that we were having with organizations because we have an assessment. And so people would come to us like, hey, we want to take your assessment. Hey, we want to be less racist. Hey, we are actively trying to do this thing. And then we get into those meetings and I would say something and it wouldn't get listened to. But if I brought Julie, and Julie was able to speak at those meetings, and like I would literally it would be, I think there was one set of meetings that we went to for those folks to come to, and like 1 week I did it by myself, I think, and I looked at Julie and I was like, yo, dude, they're not listening to me at all. They're not even hearing what I'm saying. They're asking questions that I've already answered literally with my words. And it was amazing. Like even one meeting, I think there was like half of the time Julie wasn't there and half of the time I was there, like by myself, right? And when Julie came into that meeting, the white women in that meeting visibly relaxed, and also became so much more open and so much more talkative and so much more. And so like, even when you're inviting me to do work inside of your organization, you don't even believe me about the work that I can do. It was as though I was presenting them. I joked with Julie about this. We've got this really robust, really beautiful assessment that we worked really hard on with BTGM, with members of our community, right? And when I presented it alone, it was like I was presenting a macaroni necklace that I had made in the 3rd grade, But when Julie came, suddenly there was an air of legitimacy. And I really am grateful to Julie also. Like, I'm so glad that we were able to partner together like that. And Julie was like, well, let's weaponize my whiteness. Like, let's do it, because like, that's the kind of accomplicehood. That's the kind of like thing that I personally was like, I'm really happy to have Julie on the team, because even in like building the assessment and stuff, Julie was like, well, let's weaponize whiteness against itself. And I'm like, I don't have access to that, but Julie does. And so like, but like people aren't listening, and it's so frustrating and it's hard, especially like as a Black woman. I feel like, watching the Breonna Taylor stuff play out and like seeing that people legit don't give a crap about my life. Like even the police officer that shot Breonna Taylor, like what is writing a book to say that he did the right thing, and somebody is continuously giving him that platform, but I'm trying to speak to my experience and people don't give any legitimacy to that.
So a bunch of institutions have come out saying, we're now offering anti-bias training, which like, great, I don't snaps for that. That's kind of the least you could do. What is it they should be doing? What is it that these institutions need to be doing in order to give away some of that power? Just like we were talking about before, there's this fear of losing the power, and like, it's okay. We all can have the power.
If you're not willing to give it away entirely, which, sorry, but I think you need to wrestle with that. that you're not willing to give it away entirely? And if you're not, figure out a way to share it at least. Think about structure and think about restructuring. These are hard, big questions. Yes, we're aware of that. But guess what? We've been living hard, big lives for decades and for centuries. Thank you, Gabrielle, for the snaps, right? This is like you are experiencing in the last, white people, you are experiencing in the last few years what we have been experiencing for generations. So yes, they're hard questions and you gotta think about it and you gotta think big.
Like, honestly, this question was just so personal, and it's 100% true about sharing the space, but also knowing to give up power. And I think something that really has gotten to me personally, I'm currently working a project, and I am the darkest person in the batch. I'm not the only Black woman there, but the Black woman I work under is very fair-skinned. So until she opens her mouth and is like, "Hi, I'm Black, please don't talk out the side of your neck," everyone kind of just moves on with their day. And I can see it when I get in the Zoom calls, the eyes start to pop out and they're like, oh God, I can't say this word, right? And it's like, it's very unnerving. And an experience that I had was I got told my course load, like whatever I needed to do, sent my contract, signed all of the paperwork, had my title. And this older white woman, she decided that I was doing my job too well, and she felt as though I was stepping on her toes, and decided to call the head of this program and tell them that I needed my title changed to something that I wasn't even doing, to like the possible lowest tier of billing and credits, because she felt some type of way. Mind you, in this moment, I was just like, we're really going to accommodate for this white lady? Like, does nobody see? I'm like, does nobody see how wrong and glaring this issue is? And the response that I got, it wasn't that I got the feeling that like people were inherently racist to me, or they were just like, oh, we don't like this Black girl. The problem was they were afraid of how she felt compared to my credibility, my career, me growing and elevating and saying, here's the work I did. They were more concerned that this woman felt inferior to me, and they moved mountains for her. And then within that same, I want to say maybe like 2 weeks later, I get an email saying everybody on staff has to come to a anti-racism training, and we're going to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'm like, do I show up at this meeting and just be like, hi, hello, it's me. I'm going to tell y'all the moment that y'all let racism just run amok. White supremacy, it showed up here on your doorstep and you didn't even notice it. And I feel like the biggest problem with a lot of institutions is it's people coming in where they're like, I'm a good person. And it's like, racism doesn't automatically equal like, you are a bad person, you are the villain in this story. It's your everyday situations that you're just pushing aside, and you're saying, well, so-and-so feels. You care more about so-and-so's feelings than the actual repercussions of my feelings, my existence, my livelihood. What does it matter if you can say we have a Black woman on staff, but the Black woman had to be rerouted and navigated, and her title had to be changed, and her pay was lessened, and all these other things behind the scenes. And I think so much it's about giving up the power, but also not recognizing that like you wield the power to do that. And like so often everyone's like, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me. And it's like, did you not recognize that in the moment that you said my emotions were important, change her title, that was a power play. And mountains got moved. And I think that's just my biggest thing with the industry in itself, people taking the moment to reflect and say like, I don't have to wear a white hood to be a problem.
What I want to see from our advocates, our white advocates, I'm not using the term ally anymore because that is passive, from our white accomplices and from our white advocates, I want to see you get it wrong. I want you to try. I want you to speak and say, you know what, this might not be the right thing to say. I might not be using the right language, but I feel this. And do so with the knowledge that someone on that call, someone in that meeting who looks like me, who looks like Pun, who looks like Gabby, might say, that's offensive and here's why. And you can say, thank you for telling me that. Thank you for that opportunity to learn. I did not know better, and now I do. I'm tired because of the dance that we are having to do, because people are so afraid to get it wrong that they're not willing to learn. You can't learn from that place.
Get comfortable with being
uncomfortable.
Because we've been uncomfortable. Like Angel, I think it was you who said it. We have been uncomfortable for decades and centuries. So welcome to the party.
And not just uncomfortable, but unsafe. We've been unsafe.
Unsafe, in pain, carrying burdens. And what you said, Mandi Jo, it's like, it's scary. And you're going to have to find the place in yourself that's willing to confront the fear and the discomfort. You have to be
ugly
braver.
Parts.
You have to be braver. Yeah.
The idea that as a human being, you have no ugly places within you to unpack and to unlearn and to like do better. We all do. Everyone on this call has what I call an ugly place inside that you're like, ooh, I got to clean that up. I got to clean that closet out. Mm-hmm. That is something that you have to actively work on. Mm-hmm. But if you choose to ignore those things, then you're not doing anyone any good, at least of all yourself.
Instead of a called The Good Place, they should create one called The Ugly Place.
The Ugly Place.
I feel like we're already in it though.
This is like the nightly news.
I think that for me, it comes obviously I have very different experiences than anyone on this call, and have been in a lot of like those backdoor ugly places with people who are trying to do it right and so afraid that it removes them from being able to act. And I think that what we need from leadership is the understanding that company culture starts at the top, right? We have a lot of artistic directors, I think, and Gabby and I deal with this daily with the work that we're doing right now. A lot of artistic directors asking people to come in and help fix their organizations, not understanding that you can't fix your organization until you fix yourself. So if you're an artistic leader saying, I couldn't possibly be part of the problem. Look, I hired this Black woman to come in and fix my company. I did it. That's not that you didn't do it. You haven't done it yet. So that self-reflection and really digging into those ugly parts of ourselves and not being afraid to get it wrong, because we're all going to get it wrong sometimes. I get it wrong sometimes. We all get it wrong sometimes. Like that, we can't let that keep us from acting, because that fear and that wall is not productive, and it's just going to keep things. We have to ungrip from the way that we've been doing things, and one of the ways that we've been doing things is just by not doing things. So that's got to go for sure.
Can I add on to that? Like something that you really mentioned around, we brought this Black lady in to come and fix our problem. I think so many times it's set up as like there's a goal at the end. There's a finish line that you cross, and then you're never racist again. You will never encounter white supremacy, rather than recognizing like, no, this is continuous work.
That's part of capitalism as it currently exists as well, right? Like this idea that you can hire someone to come in and overhaul a thing, but that thing can't be you, right? Like I'm paying you to come in and fix my company, to fix my theater, to fix my this. I am above reproach. I'm the one cutting the checks. You should not be worried about what I do. The fact that I hired you is enough. And that's another kind of like tenet of capitalist white supremacy that is holding us back from doing the hard work, because as you said, it starts at the top, right? But if no one at the top is willing to even do anything other than throw money at a problem, we're going to see a lot of DEI initiatives that pop up out of nowhere that do nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing right now already.
And not only that, but like I was talking to Dr. Raja, who is this incredible diversity, equity, and belonging specialist. And what they were speaking about was how people sometimes use these DEI initiatives to kind of act as the like messiah for their organization, right? And then, you know, also the martyr for their organization should they get it wrong. Like, you know, we are hiring in this Black woman, this one Black person to come into our mostly white organization. We're not intending to change any of our structures, any of our systems, any of the ways that we work, right? We don't want to change our mission. We don't want to change our vision. We don't want to change what we're actually working toward. We collectively just want this person to come in so that we have the legitimacy of, well, we hired somebody to do this work. And then when that work inevitably fails, because they weren't willing to change any of the systems of oppression that actually exist, it's the Black woman's fault. And it's often Black women who are the scapegoats for that kind of work, right? Because who visibly, like, is so clear that we are inviting into our space. Like, clearly this is a Black woman. And clearly we've done the work because clearly we hired this Black person. Can't you see with your eyes this person is Black and we are now absolved? And so that absolution, right, that intention of absolution also comes with the scapegoating of Black women and Black people. Like, oh, well, that Black person is the one that came in and did this work. That is who is to blame for how this panned out. That is who is to blame. We are no longer responsible for our actions because we hired this person who is an expert on their experience. And then they get to say, well, I guess they must not be an expert on their experience and invalidate us.
And
because they weren't willing to do the work.
For any organization or institution out there watching this, DEI work does not just mean Black people. You hire one Black musician, you don't get a round of applause. Your work is not done. It includes every single marginalized group out there. So stop focusing just on Black people. There is a whole rainbow out there of people to invite and share the power with so that we can be truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
I mean, I think that it obviously, as a white person in these spaces, my first objective is to listen. My second objective is to support, take what I've learned here and go yell it at every other white person I know. But being involved in the conversation is so crucial. And Chanel, I just want to kind of grow on the point that you were just making, that like hiring someone is not the end of it. And I think that we hear a lot of that, right? Like, oh, we fixed it. We're going to do the color purple next season. It's going to be great. Direct quote, right? And it's okay, cool. But the other side of the coin that people aren't thinking about is that it doesn't end with hiring. It doesn't start with hiring. It doesn't end with hiring. If you're not actively setting up your organization to support the people that you're bringing into it, you're just setting them up for violence. And you're just setting them up to experience everything that you're trying to solve by doing the color purple, right? So it really comes with like, we have to maybe sometimes, I think part of white supremacy is like this haste that we always talk about of like, I want to fix it. I want to fix it right now. Right. We talk about like anti-racism is not a state of being. It's a daily action, right? It's not like I did it. I'm not racist anymore. Cool. So with the haste, we're like, look at our diverse season that we just programmed after we heard everyone asking for diversity, but we haven't taken the time to do any of the work. So maybe right now, anti-racism for your organization looks like not programming that diverse season that you want to program because you got so much work to do to build safety for people before you're putting them on your stages in front of your racist audiences, testing your COVID protocols, inviting them into pure violence.
That's what I was just about to tag on too, is that especially as we're coming out of COVID, right? Like, we have been in this time of like very specific isolation for a very specific reason, right? And everybody has had this really incredible opportunity to think deeply about their position inside of white supremacy, about their position inside of like oppression, right? And where they are with their heart and their mind and with their actions, right? And so as we're coming out of COVID and forcing this reopening, in my opinion, and rushing this reopening, we're not only so lots of well-intentioned organizations, I think that lots of well-intentioned organizations are going to be like, how do we signal to people visually that we are clearly listening to what they are saying? And they're going to program by POC driven shows. They're going to program shows written by BIPOC folks, right? They're going to program shows that put BIPOC in the forefront. And they're going to invite BIPOC folks into spaces that are racially unsafe, because I can tell you that nobody's done the work that is required, right? And this force of reopening, this like constant force of reopening, right, is in my opinion, designed to make people kind of like forget about the fact that we have been calling for racial justice and no one has taken any action. So people are going to be excited about reopening. And there are all these new COVID protocols that are put in place that there has been a lot of high priority put upon, because obviously you don't want people to die in your productions, right? You don't want people to die of COVID from being in your production. It's bad press, it's bad for the money, you got to close your show, all the things, right? So obviously this is a very high priority, but the lowest priority has been racial equity from what I have seen, from what the industry has done. So people are going to be like, oh shoot, how can we tell people we've done none of the work? How can we tell people that we have? How can we virtue signal to people that we have done the work? Oh, I know. Let's program The Color Purple. Let's program a show with an all BIPOC cast. Let's do a revival of Mamma Mia, but only cast people of color, right? And so that's going to be how that goes. And so not only are you inviting BIPOC folks into a space that is going to be testing out your COVID protocols, testing out whether people will die from doing your show, testing out people if people can survive, things being open at 100% capacity as we're quickly losing the race to herd immunity, right? So we're testing that. And then also, having done none of that work beforehand, we're also inviting those people into a super unsafe space to be a person of color, to be someone who is from a marginalized group, because people are also going to be asking me like, how are you after this summer? How are you after this year? I know it's been really, really hard. And they're going to re-traumatize me with all of the details of what has happened to me and my people over the last year. And like, I don't want to be the person who is in charge of facilitating that conversation. You know what I want to do? I want to EGOT. That's what I want to do. I want to come in, I want to do my job, I want to go home, I want to do my job to the best of my ability every day, and I don't want to have to worry about being a Black person instead of people seeing my whole personhood. That's the stuff I don't like.
I would agree with everything that you're saying, Gabby, and I personally agree with you that the opening is being rushed. It's too fast, and you make a really good point about the danger that it's going to pose. And I think, also based on what you were talking about just now, Julie and Daphnee, it goes back to restructuring. It is this, like you all were saying about the EDI coming in and we've got the solution, and as you were just saying, Gabby, about like, we're going to program this and this is our fix. No. That's not the work. I will second the things that have been said by everyone else on the Zoom. That is not the work. You have to restructure from the bottom. That is it. All the BIPOC people, not just on this call, but everybody that has been activating this entire year, is asking you to restructure. We are telling you to restructure.
And I also add, while we're talking about safety, that I know a lot of Asians out there who are scared to like walk to the subway station by themselves without a companion, because of the rise of anti-Asian violence in New York City and across the country. So I think every organization needs to have that conversation. What is your safety path? How are your Asian employees feeling? What do they need? What does everybody need? So just add that into the conversation. Also, to Gabby's point about doing an all BIPOC production of Mamma Mia, that really is, and now that really is sort of the story of the season. I'm writing we're working on the visibility report right now for the 18-19 season, which will be the season right before the truncated season of the pandemic. But that really is the story of the 1819 season, is that we see that everyone is trying to diversify and be better, but they're doing it in different ways. And this goes to, Chanel's your point um, about changing the fundamental structure. What needs to change? And and what's happening is that the nonprofits are doing a really good job of finding more BIPOC directors. For instance, there was one BIPOC director that won an Obie Award 10 years ago for directing something, you know, off Broadway, but nobody paid attention, and suddenly one of the nonprofits this year decided to, one of the major predominantly white institutions that we track, the top 18 nonprofits, as Angel was saying, decided to hire her. So they're doing the work of trying to get more BIPOC directors. They are producing more BIPOC writers, telling more culturally specific stories, which raises BIPOC artists across the board. BIPOC designers are getting hired on those shows. Fantastic. That's how you create change. Broadway, in contrast, is doing what Gabby is suggesting, which is they're increasing inclusive casting, which is fantastic. Look, that means that more, actors of color are working, and that's huge. But they're not fundamentally changing the framework or the structure, right? They're hiring in this season. They hired 2 Black directors, which, as I've said before, is really rare on Broadway, to direct white plays with predominantly white casts, right? And they are, and so like it's things like that where you see more diversity on stage, but everyone, all the creative team and all the producers, are white, and so that has actually not led to the increase in diversity that Broadway, I think, hopes to aspire to. So it's just an example of 2 different ways of working, one that is actively trying to be more inclusive and one that is trying to cover their bases.
Well, I yes to all of that, because I've actually been a person who avidly waits for y'all's report to come out every year. Even before I started this organization, it's been a piece that I every year share and spread and talk about. And one thing that I remember vividly is after Hamilton came out, your report said that there was like a explosion of hiring in leads for BIPOC actors in lead roles and supporting roles. But then after that, it was almost like a backlash the year following and the year following that it dropped to almost nothing outside of Hamilton. And if nothing changes on Broadway, we're going to see that happen again and again and again. It'll be a signal. It'll be a season of BIPOC celebration to say, we hear you. And then it'll be 4 or 5 years of just all white shows with all white creative leadership and no problems addressed, with an all white, leadership team at the union, just perpetuating violence on every possible level to all BIPOC artists. And, this trend, your report has been highlighting this trend for years.
10 years.
10 years.
And
I've been reading your report.
5 years, so actually, yeah, it's and we looked back 5 years when we first did it, so it's 15 years of, yeah.
The data is there. The method is wrong. The methodology on Broadway is incorrect for what we want, and that's not to say bad. Let's take good and bad out of this conversation entirely, because when we start saying those things, and I just said bad places, dark, bad places, but let's remove those words from the narrative for a second, because people have feelings around the idea of being called good or being called bad. It's incorrect. It's just it's not viable. If my goal is to have a more diverse and inclusive Broadway, And we're going to show that by doing this thing, which we've always done. The trend is there. The trend exists. It doesn't work. It just leads to a season or a moment in the sun, and then a preceding 5 years of darkness for BIPOC actors and producers and creatives and on every level of theatrical production. So why can't we examine this model from a place of saying, look at this data, look at this backlash, this ebb and flow. How can we make it more static so that BIPOC people have more agency on Broadway?
I think what you were describing, Mandi Jo, is this microcosm slice of what has happened nationally. I think it was you who was talking about, or maybe it was Gabby. It was I forget now. The backlash effect. I forget who.
Yeah.
Yeah, the backlash effect in the theater world is the microcosm of what happened nationally. We had a black president, and suddenly we've got Trump. And so there's this swing. And so the Hamilton, the thing that, the Hamilton effect is like, oh, we've got Hamilton. Wow. Swing back the other way. I think it's a human nature thing of feeling this, again, the sense of loss. What you were just saying about the scarcity model, Pun, is it's based out of, I think, a fundamental greed. It's like, these millions I have are not enough. I just have to have more. And in order for me to have more, I can only share so much because I need this somehow. There's this confusion of want and need, and there's this confusion of security and power. Not having enough. I feel like there are some major questions people have to really reckon with about what it means to have enough and to what is enough. I just feel like that's it just feels like these people who have been artistic directors of these theaters, because as you're saying, Pun, like, yeah, we saw and the reports of our research has turned up, yeah, they're doing better, but fundamentally, like, Oscar Eustis is still there. He's still earning $850,000 a year on a nonprofit theater's status. Okay? That's a long time. If you've been artistic director longer than 7 years, what are you doing?
Also, while we're talking about the public, I think I should add that, we're talking about blind spots as well and what people can do better. What's up, Angel?
Nothing, I'm just going to mute now.
You love to see it.
Well, I think it's worth noting that, like, the public theater, we're about to release a report in a couple of weeks. The public theater got the best, most diverse theater. They had the highest numbers of board members on their board. They had, they hired the most, Latino, Latinx, and Black actors than any other theater company. But in their efforts to do good, there's a lot that they have blind spots around. For instance, in their huge, like, inclusive casting statistics, I think like 67% of their roles were inclusively cast, but Asian actors were less than 1% of all those roles, and they actually ended up being one of the theater companies that hired Asian actors the least in New York City. So,
were there any Indigenous actors?
There were no Indigenous actors in the entire season, and in fact, Playwrights Horizons was the only theater to have produced an Indigenous play by Larissa Fasthorse, which was the Thanksgiving play, which was the first Indigenous play that's been produced in the 13 years that we have data. Except, get this, it was an all-white cast.
Yep.
It was a satire about woke white people talking about,
Right.
relationship with Thanksgiving and Native traditions and stuff like that. And so it was from an Indigenous perspective, but unfortunately, no Indigenous actors were hired this year.
And isn't that an interesting commentary on the ways that we use diversity? Isn't that an interesting commentary on the ways that we continue to prop people up through representation amplification, but aren't really interested in like actual voices of actual people, or having like the fact that the only indigenous play to reproduce was a vehicle for white people, to me, says so much, right? Because as you've said, there were no indigenous people on, like, nobody. But we're going to produce this play. Look at us in our wokeness. We're going to produce this person's play, but with none of the people from the community that we are intending to represent, right? And I think it's so smart. That's why I love letter to Larissa Fasthorse. Like, I love her very much. I think it was just such an incredibly, such an intelligent read of the entire theater system, right? Like, I know you're not going to produce these plays that I have over here, but I know what you will produce. And look at them showing their whole behind.
And who can blame playwrights for working the system? They
love that for her.
I want to make sure we get Daphnee in. I'm going to throw another thought out for all of you.
I just wanted to run it back to something Pun said earlier around the dynamics of, we picked the color purple and we've done our work and everything else. And I think something that often we talk about it, but we never fully address it to the people we're talking to, is this like idea that their fatigue is acceptable. And they're like, George Floyd happened in June, I'm gonna give them till September, and then please stop talking to me about this race stuff. And so when you see this whole, I got a colorblind cast, I think it was like 1776, I was getting calls left and right like, oh, we're gonna do a colorblind cast with all women for 17. I'm like, why are you trying to reinvent Hamilton? Like, what are you doing? Like, you're not doing anything creative here. You're not really striving to put any energy, rub two brain cells together and just be like, let me make something. And I think when they get to the point of, I'm tired or I'm fatigued, or I don't want to hear about it anymore, it's like we bring in all of these BIPOC people and we're saying we have these numbers, but then they're not allowed to express, hey, y'all didn't give me enough time to actually work on my scene. I've been in shows where I've sat and watched white people get told the choreography over and over again. They get to deliver their lines 75 different ways. And it's like, Black people, get on stage now. And we're like, we don't know our lines. We open in a week. Nobody gave us choreo. And it's like, oh, it's fine. You're good. And it's just like, you're now tired of me because I'm coming in with my personality and my presence and the things that I need as a person to just do my job. And I think so much the feeling that their fatigue is valid and justifiable, it really stifles like how hard we can actually punch. Because once the ears shut off, it's like, I did that thing 7 years ago though. Like, we did the color purple for you. Like, why are you guys upset now? And again, it goes back to my point of thinking there's a goalpost. It's like they step one step up and they're like, we've achieved success. I hold the #1 trophy and now I'm done. Where it's like, no, everybody, it's a circle.
They want it to be like the end of, I've been speaking in movie analogies all afternoon. I apologize. But it's like they want this process to be the end of like Mr. Holland's opus, you know? Where there's just like this really like nice bow tied onto it and everybody feels good and you did the thing and racism is over. When in reality, it's like Fury Road and it just never ends. Like it's just a dystopian hellscape that we're all living in that we have to try to make the best of. Anyway, somebody say something else so that's not what we end on.
No. Chanel, you were going to ask us something else, weren't you? You were going to...
I wanted to ask, what are examples of real advocacy? And I don't necessarily just mean for white people, because while Julie using their whiteness as a weapon is one great example, I am a biracial, cis heteronormative female, which means I only have that experience. I wouldn't even say my experience is the same as Mandy Jo's experience. So that means I have a lot of ways that I can be an advocate for other people. And I was thinking about this back in February when there was the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, because a lot of people came forward and said they didn't want to make a big deal out of it because it was Black History Month. And in my mind, I was like, there's room for all of us here. No. So what are other ways that people can be advocates? Because they don't always need to be big, flashy, grand gestures. Me being in a room and someone saying something offensive, and before I can even open my mouth, someone else stepping in, using their positionality, maybe either because they are white, maybe because they are a more senior individual, what have you. But that is an example of advocacy. So I wanted to ask you all, what are other ways that people can be advocates? Mandi Jo, take it away.
Well, it's not a small thing for the people that it affects, but it is a small act of advocacy. As we are going back into theater in person, and as we are going into, virtual performances, I have made it a point that whenever I go to a production or go to, to view or to attend, I call in advance and I ask, is there ASL interpretation provided for this production? Oh, no, we don't. Can you please provide it? Yeah, okay. Because oftentimes when it comes to accessibility, it's not provided unless someone asks for it. So I just make it a point now to ask for it because it should be there. It should just be there. And like I said, it's a small activity that means something big for the people who actually need that accessibility. And I bring it up only to say, those are the things that I think have the most traction, not the big flashy things on Facebook, not the arguments with your uncle, it's the using your privilege and using your spoons so that someone who has less than you in the terms of spoons doesn't have to spend their spoons. Like I can't imagine what it would be like to be a theater patron who has an accessibility need, that every single time that they want to experience art, they're hindered by their accessibility needs in order to experience the same art that we have. And that's yet another facet of this conversation, because inclusion doesn't just mean race. Inclusion doesn't just mean gender. Inclusion means having accommodations so that a person who is on the autism spectrum has accommodations so that they can attend a show. But if it becomes overstimulating, having a space that they can go to without making them feel like a burden, or making sure that there is ASL interpretation available for every performance. Those things, they should be universal, and they're not. So that's one way I think I can see an allyship or activism, advocacy in action.
I think that's like spot on for me. It's something where when I walk in the room, I know my needs as a Black woman, but I also try to think of what someone else who does. Like, I don't want people to have to say like, I'm on the spectrum, or this is what I need. Like, people should not have to give their entire life, like, background and scenario in order for you to go, okay, well, that's credible, I guess I'll do it. And like, I've had conversations directly with like CEOs I've worked for where long-winded convos about, yeah, we need to increase our diversity, and like, I'm so glad we're doing these monthly events. And I'm like, but you realize that like there's no wheelchair ramp here, and we're on the 25th floor. And should a fire happen, like, no one has thought any of this through. And he literally said to me, oh, well, like, I just feel like that's just something that's even further down the line that we have to. And I'm like, huh? I'm like, people need accessibility today, not 20 years from now. And for me, a large part of it is when I walk into the space, I'm not using the wheelchaired bathroom. And it's like, yeah, that'd be convenient, help me change, sure. But knowing like, within my own power and my own privileges, I have to step up and say like, this is what someone needs, whether I know if anyone in this room needs it or not. There's a lack here. And I think like Mandy Jo even saying that, just constantly asking, it's way more powerful than people having to constantly give up themselves and be put in vulnerable positions to possibly be met with someone saying, that's so far down the line, I can't think of it right now.
Like for me personally, as a cis Black woman and a dark-skinned cis Black woman, I'm thinking about my trans siblings too. Like we have to think about like trans voices and bring trans voices into the room as well, especially as Black women. I think like dark-skinned Black women, like specifically, are already under such duress. Like the fact that Daphnee mentioned earlier, that there's like, even in places where diversity is key, like there's often a hierarchy of colorism too, right? And so like, if I, as a cis, dark-skinned Black woman, am facing what I'm facing, you know what I mean? What do the intersections of trans identity bring into that conversation as well, right? And so like thinking about LGBTQ voices, thinking about trans voices specifically, thinking about gender nonconforming voices, thinking about like making sure that we are paying attention to like pronouns, making sure that we're paying attention to like what trans people are asking for all of the time, and not just when it's convenient to us, not just when it's like a moment where we can say like, we have to listen to the trans voices, friends. Like, what does that look like doing the dirty work of like, all right, someone has just called me out for being, you know, not advocating, not going hard enough, right? And like, as a Black woman, it's like, woo, like, we're calling me out, and like having to deal with like that, like having to deal with what Mandi Jo called those ugly places earlier of like, these are the intersections of my identity, but there are people whose intersections affect them even more deeply than mine, right? And so like really doing the dirty work internally to be like, okay, what do I have to do to make sure that person can come with me too? What do I got to do to make sure that those people come with me too? So that we're all breaking through the doors together. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, just responding directly to what you're saying there, Gab, because it's related to what you were saying, Mandi Jo, in terms of accessibility. For example, if for someone who's deaf, or wheelchair accessibility, or autism, or whatever it is, what you just said about transgender, like it seems like the theme is that it's about broadening our sense of inclusivity, like you were saying, Gabby, like how can we help each other carry this? Somebody said something specifically much earlier in the conversation about white folks, because you asked Chanel about what are some other forms of advocacy and allyship that are active, that are smaller maybe. Somebody had the great idea of, what if you're with your white friends, if you're a group of white people, you're not in a position of any particular power or wealth, but you're in a group with each other, talk about it. You know, that I think you have to start with the conversation. I think start talking with each other about it. And Pun, you were saying like, oh, we're tired. We are tired. We are tired. Be conscious that when you ask people of color to help you understand something, that you're asking them to do work, and that people get paid to do this kind of work, and they should. And that goes for conversations like this in the future. But that also, it isn't just us you need to talk to. You need to talk to each other to see where you're at. Again, be brave. Be willing to put yourself in that position of just saying like, what do I need to learn? What can I do? Not to us necessarily, but you know, just that's actually, that'll be really active if you start there.
Can I'm kind of aware of time, and I do want to, I want to talk about the actual structure of things. And there's a lot of things, I think there's a lot of white people out there who feel like they can't change the structure, and we've already talked about that. But since this is a Shubert platform, I'm hoping that there are some people who work for the Shubert Foundation out there listening, perhaps, we'll see. But we've been doing at AAPAC, in our next report, we're going to do a lot of economic impact data. And one of the things that we're looking at is the inequities of funding out there for BIPOC theaters, theaters of color, compared to the PWIs, the predominantly white institutions that we've tracked for 13 years. And you know, so we've looked at we've looked at federal funding, we've looked at state funding, we've looked at city funding for these organizations. City funding is doing a lot better than either the state or the federal. But the greatest gap in terms of funding comes from the private sector, both individual donors as well as private foundations. And these theaters of color can't, they don't throw the big galas that attract those private donors. But the private foundations have a responsibility here. Usually, many of them don't have application processes. Usually, it's about who you know and about relationships that you have. In like the board of one of the PWIs has to advocate, to get funding from a private foundation. But the difference is that private foundations gave almost 10 times as much money in the 18-19 season to PWIs than they did theaters of color. And since this is a Shubert platform, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. The Shubert Foundation, it does better than a lot of other foundations in terms of giving grants to the theaters of color. But even then, only 11 out of the 28 theaters of color got grants that year, and every grant to a theater of color was below $100,000. 13 out of the 18 PWIs received grants higher than $10,000. All 18 of them were funded, 100% were funded by the Shubert organization, with some higher than $300,000. And when we reached out to artistic directors of theaters of color that we have relationships with as to why they did not receive funding from the Shubert Foundation, we heard horror stories that spoke to the difficulty of access and a lack of transparency. So I just want to put that out there. That is something that you, people who are on the Shubert Foundation, can do to change. Here's a quote from Mia Katigbag, a friend of ours. She's okay with me using her name. She's the artistic director of the National Asian American Theater Company, NATCO. She said, quote, "I stopped applying to the Shubert Foundation 2 years ago after many years of trying and not getting anything. I've invited them to everything we've done, no feedback, no response, basically radio silence. I believe they also changed their eligibility rules, which excluded us because of our budget size. I know that this kind of exclusivity is something we're trying to address. That is, budget size is not always an indicator of quality work or a measure of fiscal responsibility or viability. Not having a full-time salaried person does not mean a small organization cannot produce excellent work over a sustained period of time. These criteria are ingrained white values. Despite our long history of accomplishment, however, the Shuberts continue to disregard us. And that's coming from a theater company in New York City that is Obie Award-winning and Drama Desk nominated. So I just wanted to put it out there that there are these structures in place that are forcing BIPOC theaters to stay small. Meanwhile, these huge, MCC got I think it was a $9 million from the state. Second Stage got $2 million from the state in order to buy a Broadway house. They're buying homes for these white theaters, right? Think about what real estate means. That means that they can become landlords. That means that they can have mortgages, more access to more money in the bank. They can charge rent if they wanted to. They can produce without having to pay rent. Right? So all of these benefits that white theaters are getting, that, BIPOC theaters are not. And meanwhile, we talked to the artistic director of the Negro Ensemble, and she said that no matter what our budgetary needs are year to year, we always get the same amount of money, and it's almost like it's a way to prevent theaters of color from growing. And we all have to realize that, even MTC was once a small theater company on the Upper East Side. Now they own a Broadway house. And while, we don't begrudge people their ability to grow, but there's intrinsically, it's a question of what we're valuing and what we're not valuing, right? And I think what's happening is that we're not we're not incorporating cultural equity into value. And these theaters of color provide a space. They're the hub of communities for marginalized communities. Usually, they provide so much more value beyond just the artistry. But the artistry is great. Like they provide the pipeline, by which these writers of color and artists of color are then able to populate the larger PWIs, and so, but they're not reaping any of the rewards. So that is a fundamental structural issue that we all need to look at that nobody is talking about. So I just wanted to put it out there.
And if I may, to just like jump on that and like keep going with it, like that fundamental structural issue that we're seeing is also like a very like a microcosmic look at the wider values of the American societal systems as a whole, right? We're saying that we're intentionally, like maybe not intentionally, but the systems that are in place are consistently underfunding Black and brown theaters, right? We're consistently underfunding BIPOC theaters while giving white theaters, access to money, access to power, access to real estate, as Pun was saying, right? And it's the same thing when we think about redlining, when we think about the intentional stripping of generational wealth through things like, the bombing of Black Wall Street, burning down literal financial institutions that were built after Reconstruction to ensure that Black people were able to maintain sovereignty and able to maintain, their own generational wealth after slavery, right? So these things, an American theater system isn't created in a vacuum. When we're watching the history of Broadway, which the Shubert organization is a deep, deep part of, because the Winter Garden Theater also opened with the number "Paris is a Paradise for Coons," which is wild to me, right? It is a production entirely done in blackface. Al Jolson has a theater named after him, was the father of modern film, right? Like, we see these things as they move forward, right? And American theater didn't grow up on its own. American theater grew up in America. And the values in America historically have been enslavement, have been conquering, have been murdering, have been brutality, right? And intentionally keeping BIPOC people inside of these smaller marginalized groups and fighting each other, as we said, for the crumbs from the table of joy. So when we're looking at that to me is indicative of the fact that white American theater and American theater on the whole can canonically, right? Or canonically, did I say that correctly? Like the canon of theater itself is based in what theater grew up in. And it is a branch on this tree that is deeply rooted and entrenched in ensuring that Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, all of us here of the global majority, right, are intentionally held down and intentionally held back from advancement, right? And so those systems continue to be in place because that is how America works. And so if we want to do something different, we have to expect to do something different, right? And we also have to examine our history, because I love and am so excited to have been invited here by the Shubert organization, which to me is like just so freaking lit, dude. Like, we're here, right? And I will say that I have not heard a lot from them since they made that initial statement last June saying, we know our history and we want to do better, right? And like, not to bite the hand that is intending to feed me now, but I will say that like, it is so essential to us to unentangle ourselves from the systems that continuously and intentionally marginalize all of us, right? And affect, and those marginalizations that affect me, right, affect the white people at the top of the Shubert organization, because they are robbed of my joy. They are robbed of my artistry. because I'm here talking to y'all when I could be writing something, when I could be working towards that EGOT, okay? So I wanted to piggyback on Pun's statement there.
But I think, because then the question is, like, for any white artistic directors who are hearing all of this, like, yes, but how? And I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I think that we're at a precipice right now as we look towards reopening, right? Things have been shut down, people are doing internal work, et cetera. And in a month, things are coming back, right? Tickets are going on sale, doors are opening. And I just wanted to share a conversation that Gabby and I had recently that really opened my eyes. So for any white artistic directors listening to this right now, I hope that this helps anyone understand anything. Is I had a conversation with an arts leader, a local arts leader here, who was talking about renovations that needed to be done to the building in order to open again, and like the amount of funding they were going to have to put into COVID safety. And what they said to me, which I understood at the time, was if we don't fix this building thing and get our COVID protocols in place, it doesn't matter how anti-racist we are because we won't be open. And I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. And thank you, Gabby, for being like, no, that does not make sense. An organization should not be reopening so that they can become anti-racist. They should be doing that work up front. They forget the stage that needs to be replaced, take that money, put it into fixing the core of the organization, and then deal with reopening later. And so if that is helpful for anyone who's right now looking towards what happens when we put tickets on sale in June, like, I hear you, I understand. I have been where you're sitting up like, yes, this does make sense. And we can't operate without money coming in, et cetera. But we got to get priority going. Like, we have to get, what we're hearing here is we need to prioritize things. And that creating safety for marginalized folks needs to be the number one priority. And in terms of those like small acts of advocacy, first of all, that's a huge act of advocacy in my opinion. But second of all, what can we be doing in these like small acts of advocacy? I think it's about holding space for multiple oppressions, which is something, it's like kind of been a theme throughout this call. And it's really been a theme in society lately, is people, especially people who are not marginalized or are less marginalized, who are coming from places of privilege, not being able to understand that like all of these things can exist together, right? We heard like, I just did all of this work about like understanding Black Lives Matter, and now I'm being asked to pivot and understand about like stop AAPI hate, and trans people matter too, and deaf people, like, and we need to be able to hold space for all of that. We saw it with the LA Stage Alliance fallout, if anyone was following it, that like there were both acts of racism and acts of ableism. The racism was brought forward first. I work at Deaf West, and when Deaf West came in and was like, also no one provided ASL access for us, people like could not hold space for it, just like didn't have the capacity for it. So I think that if we work on ourselves being able to hold that space for that, not only multiple oppressions, but how they all intersect together, then that is crucial, and not being afraid to name those things and talk about those things.
Final question for everyone here. Someone watching right now wants to get involved with the work your organization is doing, be it volunteering their time, checking out resources, what have you. What should they do?
You can go to our website, www.apacnyc, that's AAPACNYC.org. And there are, you can either get in touch with us, there's a way to contact us through the website, or if you just wanted to make a donation, we accept donations. But that is a way to get in touch with our organization.
So we also have a website, Black Theater Girl Magic, TRE, theatergirlmagic.org. We are also accepting donations. We are now a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So we are accepting donations through our website. And also because the organization is growing and we are finding ourselves trying to attack this problem from as many angles as we possibly can. You know, we're recruiting, we're looking for more volunteers and for more help. So if you're interested and you really want to put your hands on the problem and really start to be an advocate, we're always happy to have more members of the team. So you can reach out to us on Facebook at Black Theater Girl Magic. Our Instagram is BTGM with an underscore. And we'd love to talk to you.
And for the Joy Jackson Initiative, you can check us out at www.joyjackson.org. There you can learn more about our growing work, including our assessment, which is our primary learning tool, the Joy Jackson Assessment for Systemic Equity. And it's based on the personal testimonies of over 100 BIPOC theater practitioners, ranging from students to Broadway professionals, and fortified with the community's formal demands for racial equity. Our intention is to measure both culture and structure and use the assessment to collect and contextualize data for individual organizations and arts leaders to understand the stories of their own organizations and turn their awareness into anti-racist action. So you can check out more about the assessment on our website and learn all about our other learning tools and what we're moving forward to do next. Julie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I'll just say, yeah, we are currently also looking for more volunteers to join the organization. We're very close to accepting donations as soon as our 501c3 comes through. So come sign up for our mailing list so we can let everyone know how to pay us for the work, because it's going to take a lot of money. Okay, bye.
I just wanted to quickly mention, if you are a brown or Black woman and you're interested in joining or becoming a member of BTGM, our Facebook is always live. We have tons of moderators, our e-board. Everyone is always hands-on and quick to give a reply. So it's not something that we are excluding anyone. We're very accessible. So if you would like to join BTGM, Facebook is the way.
You reminded me, all of you, that yes, we are on Facebook. AAPAC is on Facebook and Instagram. Our Instagram handle is AAPAC_NYC. And also, to a note about, we don't have tons of people actually moderating. We're a bit more scrappy, and we're all volunteer based. Some people have asked very generously how they can help. And what often happens in that regard is, depending on the person, is that if we have a specific project coming up, like with the statistics reports especially, then that becomes a really great time for people to help and volunteer, or if we have a specific event coming up. So if for some reason you don't hear back from us, that immediately it's because we've got lots of performing actors who are working. We have mothers in the group. It just takes us a second to get back.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today. I look forward to seeing everything that you're going to be doing in the future, and I hope we get to see each other in person as soon as it is safe enough to do so. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Chanel. Thank you, everybody. I love the energy tonight.
Thanks, everyone.
Really energized by all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chanel. Thank you, everybody.
Yep.